My name is Jenna Rowe. I'm 32 years old. She's just a security guard my dad said loud enough to slice through the music and clinking glasses right in the middle of my brother's wedding reception. He smiled when he said it, not cruelly, not kindly, just decisively, like a man delivering a punchline no one had asked for. No one defended me. Not my mother who looked down at her napkin. Not my brother whose new in-laws chuckled politely at the table. Not even me. I stood off to the side near the drinks table, sipping water from a glass I hadn't set down in over an hour. Black suit, no jewelry, no makeup, no stage presence, which is exactly how they preferred me, quiet, ignorable, uncomplicated. My dad used to be proud of me when I wore a uniform. When I stood in formations and earned medals, he could name drop to neighbors. But that version of me doesn't exist anymore. And in his eyes, neither does anything worth mentioning. But he doesn't know. I stood there in a hall full of flowers and crystal and polite small talk, and no one knew what was about to hit the news tonight. No one knew, but they will. Because this isn't the first time I've been dismissed, but it might be the last. Walk with me. Let me show you who I really am, and what happened to the man who thought I was nothing more than a security guard. The music returned a few moments after my father's voice faded, as if the room had absorbed his comment and decided not to confront it. That was the thing about my family discomfort, was something to be quickly paved over. We didn't confront. We adjusted. Someone offered me champagne. I declined. They looked relieved. At a table near the front, the photographer was gathering the bridal party for pictures. My name wasn't called. I hadn't expected it to be. The room smelled like roses and roasted lamb, the kind of scent that's both expensive and slightly suffocating. Someone had spent months planning this night, and I wasn't going to ruin it by defending myself. That would be messy, unbecoming. So I smiled. Small, controlled. The kind of smile you can carry for hours without straining the muscles. And I stood still, unmoving, like I'd been trained to. Across the room, a woman in a navy blue dress paused mid-sip. Her eyes caught mine, sharp assessing. Then she looked away as if filing something for later. Most people ignored me the same way you overlook a uniformed hotel staff member, assuming they're just part of the background. I had learned to live in that space, invisible by choice, because when you go quiet long enough, people assume you've disappeared. But they forget it's in silence that some of the most dangerous things take shape. And tonight, the shape of something was forming, just out of view, just past the flowers and fake laughter. A line being crossed, a truth inching forward unseen, but waiting. I stayed there, not because I was frozen, but because I was ready. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when people used to stand when I walked into a room. I enlisted when I was 20, commissioned 2 years later, and spent most of my 20s moving between bases, deployments, and missions that didn't have names until they were over, if they were ever named at all. My father used to love telling people I was his daughter, the officer. He never quite got the ranks right, but he wore my promotions like cufflinks, at least until I stopped talking about what I did. I learned early that some things couldn't be explained to people who hadn't seen them. You start skipping details, then full stories, then entire years, and eventually you just stop talking. That's what happened after Spain. After we intercepted that cargo ship with medical equipment and I opened the crate that changed everything. That was the moment things unraveled, because what I found inside didn't belong in any shipping manifest. And when I filed my report, it vanished. And 3 days later, I was rotated out of the unit. They called it protocol. I called it exile. I was reassigned stateside, no rank adjustment, no ceremony, just silence. And the silence followed me. I resigned 6 months later. No retirement speech, no handshake. I packed my uniform into a box and rented an apartment with a leak in the ceiling and a view of nothing. I started working for a private security firm, 12-hour shifts, watching parking lots and truck bays. Minimal interaction, minimal questions. It wasn't beneath me. It was just quiet. My father didn't understand. He asked if I was burned out, said I was too smart to be wasting time with warehouse gigs. But what he meant was, you used to make me proud. Now you make me uncomfortable. He stopped telling people I was in the military. He started introducing me as between things, then eventually not at all. My mother still called sometimes. She always sounded unsure of what to say, like every conversation was a test she hadn't studied for. I let her fumble through it. It wasn't her fault. She didn't know what they buried or what I was still digging up, because even after I left the uniform, I hadn't stopped. The pattern hadn't disappeared. The route changed, but the movement remained. And somewhere out there, someone was still trafficking bodies through ports I knew too well. So I kept watching, not because anyone asked me to, but because someone had to, and I was already standing there. I didn't want to go to the wedding, not because I wasn't happy for my brother. I was in my own quiet way, but because I knew what it would be. A parade, a performance, and I wasn't part of the cast anymore. Still, I went. Out of respect, out of obligation, and maybe, if I'm honest, out of a flicker of hope that things might feel different, that I might be allowed to exist there without explanation or defense. That hope died the moment I walked into the rehearsal dinner. My mother glanced at my outfit, a black suit, no frills, and gave that tight smile she saves for people who make her uncomfortable in public. My father introduced me to the groom's family as our youngest, then quickly changed the subject. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Someone asked if I was between jobs. Someone else asked if I had ever finished college. I answered with soft smiles and shorter sentences. At the photo session, I stood beside my brother and his fiancée. The photographer paused, then said, "Just immediate family for this one." I stepped aside. No one stopped me. That night, back at my hotel room, I opened my laptop, not to scroll, to work. A contact I'd been feeding information to, a quiet figure from a quiet agency, had sent a message. Encrypted, urgent, shipping container, Sector 12B, 2200 hours, confirmed movement. You were right. My chest tightened. Sector 12B was part of my route, not scheduled for activity tonight. Not unless something was moving that shouldn't. 14 minors. No names yet, no faces, just a number and coordinates, and silence from the people who should have cared. I sat there for a long time, staring at the message, then at the dress shoes I was supposed to wear to the ceremony tomorrow. And that's when it hit me. No one would notice if I missed the toasts. No one would miss me in the family group photos. They'd just assume I was somewhere in the back keeping an eye on the parking lot. So I charged my phone, packed light, left the dress shoes in the corner. I didn't need anyone to believe me anymore. I just needed to be where it counted. And tonight, that wasn't the wedding. The streets were quiet by the time I reached the loading yard. The air had that late summer heaviness, thick and unmoving. I wore my black jacket, comfortable, familiar, forgettable. In my pocket was the burner phone I used only for one thing, and tonight it was already warm in my hand. Sector 12B was darker than usual. No trucks, no workers. Just two containers side by side parked too neatly, like someone wanted them to disappear in plain sight. I crouched behind a stack of pallets, watching for patterns, security routines, exit points, cameras. The training kicked in just like it always did, the part of me I never lost even after they stripped away the title. A man stepped out from behind one of the containers. Unmarked clothes, no badge, phone pressed to his ear. He scanned the yard like he didn't expect to be seen, like he'd paid to make sure of it. I gripped the phone tighter. The plan was always the same: observe, record, report. Let the agency take it from there. That's how I'd survived this long, by staying one step removed. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the message I'd received earlier that day from a name I hadn't seen in months. A woman I'd served with in Eastern Europe. We'd lost contact after everything unraveled. Her message was short. "You still watching? They're moving again. You were right." Attached was a photo. 3 girls, maybe 13 at most, crouched in a warehouse corner, faces blurred, clothes dirty. Tag sent through Eastport last week. Eastport, the same channel, still running. I felt my jaw tighten. I remembered their faces, the ones from Spain, the ones in crates that never made the news, the ones who vanished because I was told to let it go. I hadn't saved them, but maybe tonight I could save these. I pulled back, opened the phone, wrote a message I'd been avoiding for over a year. "I can go in. I'm close." No backup needed. No reply. Just the blinking cursor. Then silence. It was the longest minute I've ever waited, and then not a yes, not a no, just coordinates, a timestamp, and one line, do what you have to. I stared at those words, simple, final, and in that moment I felt the weight of everything I used to be, all the years, all the silence, all the versions of myself that were pushed aside. I stood, stepped out of the shadows. My boots were quiet. My breathing wasn't. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I'd make it through. But I was done waiting for someone else to do what needed to be done. And if this was where it ended for me, at least it would end with something that mattered. I moved fast. Not recklessly, just with the kind of clarity that comes when you stop asking for permission. The containers weren't locked yet. That meant they weren't leaving for at least another hour. That gave me time. Not much, but enough. I circled wide around the yard, ducking behind forklifts and shipping crates until I reached the control shack, one security camera on the roof, two floodlights facing opposite corners, both on separate circuits and both wired through a panel I'd studied for months during my night shifts. I reached it in 20 seconds, killed the outer lights. The yard dimmed, not dark, but uncertain. The way I needed it. I moved back toward the containers. The man I'd seen earlier was pacing now, speaking into a walkie a little faster than before. He hadn't noticed the change. Not yet. I crouched behind a stack of shrink-wrapped pallets and took out the burner phone, opened the camera, snapped 5 quick shots, plate numbers. Container IDs, faces, vehicle markings. One wide shot showing the entrance gate and the armed guard beside it. I sent them to my contact. Seconds later, received. Stand by. But I didn't. I moved. Because standing by had never saved anyone. I used the old side entrance, half-rusted the lock already loose from weeks of wear. Slipped through, stayed low, listened. Inside one container, nothing. Inside the second, a sound. A whimper. Then, silence. I tapped twice on the metal wall, waited, then opened it. 6 girls, maybe more, huddled, confused, eyes wide with the kind of fear that doesn't have words. I whispered, "I'm here to help. You're going to be okay." One girl nodded. Another held the hand of the smallest one who looked too young to even understand what was happening. I worked quickly guiding them one by one to the drainage culvert near the southeast fence. I'd measured it weeks ago. It was tight, but passable. The second trip I was spotted. A man shouted. I ran. He followed. But he didn't know the yard like I did. Didn't know where the crates stacked uneven, where the footing was slick from the leaking pipes. He slipped. I didn't. I got the last 3 girls through the fence just as the headlights appeared at the far end of the yard. Unmarked vans, 2 of them. Doors opened. Men stepped out, not in uniform, but you could tell. The way they moved, the way they scanned. They didn't say my name, but one of them met my eyes and gave a nod. And I turned away, not because I didn't care, but because my part was done. Back at the hotel, the wedding was probably wrapping up. I'd missed the cake, the speeches, the awkward dancing. But I hadn't missed what mattered, and for the first time in a long while, I felt exactly where I needed to be. The next morning, the rooftop brunch was already in full swing when I arrived. White linens, sunlight filtered through skylights, the clink of mimosa glasses, everything curated to look effortless. The newlyweds floated from table to table like royalty. My mother was orchestrating details from her seat with military precision. My father laughed too loudly at stories that weren't funny. No one asked where I'd been. No one noticed I hadn't come back to the hotel last night. To them, I'd simply blended back into the scenery. I took a seat near the end of the table, away from the cameras, away from the light. I could still feel the weight in my shoulders, not exhaustion, but something deeper, like residue, adrenaline fading, the aftershock of something irreversible. I sipped my coffee. I hadn't changed, still in the same black jacket. No one cared enough to ask why. My father eventually acknowledged me. "You're early," he said. No late-night shifts at the parking lot. He smiled like it was a joke, the same kind of joke he'd made a dozen times before, rehearsed deflective, meant to pull laughs from people who didn't know better. Before I could answer, someone's phone vibrated on the table, then another. Then came the chime from the restaurant's mounted television. The news anchor's voice interrupted the brunch playlist. Clear, steady, breaking overnight a major development in a months-long investigation into international trafficking routes along the East Coast. A successful operation led to the rescue of 14 miners from a shipping yard in the city. Authorities say the mission was made possible by intelligence provided from within the private security sector, silence. The anchor continued. They played the footage. Not blurry, not distant, clear as glass. There I was, on screen, in the black jacket, directing agents, leading children to safety, name included. No rank, but it didn't matter. The chatter at the table stopped. The cutlery paused mid-air. Even the clink of the mimosa glasses ceased. My father didn't speak, didn't blink. Across the room, one of the guests, a Navy officer I vaguely recognized from the rehearsal dinner, stood, walked the length of the table, and stopped directly in front of me. She looked down at me, not with pity, not with surprise, with recognition, and then she did something that made every breath in the room halt. She brought her feet together, put her hand to her brow, and saluted. Ma'am. That one word delivered with quiet respect was louder than anything else that day. I nodded, not to accept praise, just to acknowledge that someone had finally seen me as I was. And still I didn't say a word, because silence used correctly is never empty. Sometimes it's the sharpest thing in the room. They didn't know how to recover. After the salute, the room stayed quiet for a long time, too long for comfort, too short for acknowledgement. The brunch buffet went cold. The music didn't resume. Someone tried to restart conversation, but it died in their throat. And still, no one looked at me directly, except my father. His eyes didn't hold anger, not pride either, just confusion, like he'd missed an entire chapter of a story he thought he knew by heart. That was you, he asked, finally, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. I didn't answer. He already knew. He looked back at the television, now muted, replaying the footage with subtitles. Former military officer leads covert rescue of 14 miners in overnight operation. My name. Spelled correctly. No title. No apology. A man across the table, the groom's uncle, I think, leaned forward. You never said she was in the military, he said to my father. My father opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. I didn't know she still... But he didn't finish the sentence. Because what was there to say? That he stopped paying attention the moment my job didn't fit his narrative? That he introduced me as a security guard because that's all he thought I amounted to? Maybe he believed it. Maybe he needed to, until the world showed him otherwise. I didn't enjoy his discomfort. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted truth. And now it no longer needed my defense. After the footage ended, people began to shift awkwardly in their seats. Small glances. Nervous sips of coffee. Someone clapped once, a half-hearted reflex, but it didn't catch. The Navy officer who had saluted me. She sat beside me quietly. Didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. We heard about you, she said, voice calm. Back in 21. Spain, right? I nodded once. You were right, she said. Some of us never forgot. It was a strange thing to be recognized, not with fanfare, but with memory. I looked over at my father again. He was staring at his plate hands, still fork untouched. I wondered what he was thinking. Maybe about every time he'd dismissed me. Maybe about the version of me he introduced to the world, small enough to control, simple enough to ignore. Maybe about the way truth doesn't wait for permission to surface. He didn't apologize. He didn't stand. But this time he didn't speak over me. And in that silence I felt something shift. I hadn't risen from some underdog role. I hadn't been vindicated by others. I'd been who I was the entire time. They were just late to the realization. I left before the dishes were cleared. No dramatic exits, no doors slammed. Just the quiet sound of my heels on marble tile, one foot in front of the other. No one called after me. No one needed to. Outside, the morning had turned. Clouds rolled in, soft and gray. The city felt heavier than it had the night before, but I didn't mind. Weight has never frightened me. I carry it well. I walked 3 blocks before I pulled out my phone. No notifications from my family, no new messages, just a missed call from an unknown number one I recognized from an encrypted thread. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need a debriefing. I already knew what mattered. The girls were safe, the smugglers were arrested, and I'd done what I said I would without needing a badge, a rank, or a ceremony. That was enough. I made my way toward the water, past the storefronts, past the sidewalks where no one looked twice at me. They never do. And that's fine. I've learned how to move through the world quietly, not because I don't have something to say, but because most people only listen when silence becomes undeniable. I used to think I wanted my family to see me. Now I understand I wanted them to stop misseeing me. There's a difference. They still don't know the whole story. They probably never will. But maybe that's the point. I wasn't built to explain myself to people who choose not to understand. I wasn't built for wedding toasts or family spotlights. I was built for moments in the dark, for acts that don't make headlines even when they do, for showing up when it's quiet, for protecting what no one else notices. They called me a security guard, and I let them, because sometimes the best disguise is the truth no one believes. Let them keep their titles. I have my own. It lives in the hands I steady, the doors I breach, the children I carry out of the dark. I don't need applause. I need a clear path, a locked gate, a second chance to do the right thing when no one's watching. They can have their silence. I'll keep mine, because mine is made of steel.